I saw a coach posting on a message board about how he was yelled at when he was a player, and he turned out okay. So therefore, we should be able to yell at children today. Uh, and first, I take issue with this idea that children today do not get yelled at by their coaches and their parents, because that's literally all I see when I go to games. I was at a varsity high school game this week, two very good teams. First half, one team's up by 10. The coach of the team that's losing calls a timeout, walks out on the court, meets the player in front of the bench, and for the duration of the 30-second timeout is in her face, screaming and pointing at her, and screaming to make sure that everybody in the entire gym can hear him over the music that's being played during the timeout. And I don't even know what the girl did wrong. By his demonstrating and pointing and yelling, I'm pretty sure she ran to the wrong spot in a play. The play was designed for somebody else and she went to the wrong spot, or because she was the point guard, maybe she passed the ball in the wrong direction to start the play. I don't know, but it wasn't anything that caused a turnover. It was in the first half. It certainly didn't cost them the game. They had a stalled offensive possession without a shot clock, and he called timeout to get him recorrected and basically belittle this girl in front of an entire gymnasium. So this idea that yelling doesn't happen, I don't understand where this perception of today's children has come from, because at every game that I go to, I see behaviors like this. But more to the point, yelling isn't coaching. And it doesn't matter if some guy turned out okay or not. And we're not really talking about whether or not the yelling will adversely affect these children as they get older. Yelling is not the same thing as coaching. Now, certainly there are coaches who speak with louder voices than others. And some may construe that as yelling. But I don't think that's what we're speaking about now. When I'm talking about yelling at a player, I'm talking about, what I witnessed, getting in a face, yelling and screaming when, you're 2 feet away from a person. You don't need, to use your outdoor voice. You can talk quietly in the middle of a huddle and the players can hear you. That's different than, if a player's, on the far end of the court and you're yelling at them to try to get their attention over the noise in the environment in the gymnasium. I know I yell at players to get their attention during games. If I'm trying to sub and the player doesn't know, so I'm yelling across the court to get her to come off the court, or if I'm trying to move her slightly into a position or help her out or something like that. Certainly I'm yelling, but I'm not yelling at the player. I'm more yelling to get their attention so that I can explain whatever it is that I'm trying to explain that player. And so to me, that's not the same thing as yelling at players or, players being yelled at. To me, that's, essentially it's using yelling when, a lower volume would probably be more appropriate, or would at least be able to convey the message just as well. So if you're in the middle of a huddle and you're yelling and screaming, you could convey that message just as well without having to yell and scream. And so that to me is what I'm talking about. And then, you can take that one step further on the negative spectrum and then get into, yelling and cursing at players or demeaning players, belittling players and things like that, as well as gesturing at players while you're yelling at them, like I saw during the game. And to me, those behaviors are totally unwarranted and uncalled for, with high school athletes. There's just no reason to me why we should be up in a player's face yelling and screaming and pointing at her because she didn't run the right play or whatever it was. Maybe if there's a serious behavioral issue, then we want to address it a little bit more aggressively, but I think those situations are few and far between in terms of what most people are talking about. So I just think that there's this idea amongst a lot of people that coaching is yelling. And if you're not standing and yelling, if you're not screaming at players, if you're not pointing directions, you're not coaching. And I think that's a slippery slope to go down, because once we look at yelling and screaming as the normal behaviors of coaching, well, then stepping out on the court during a timeout and yelling at a player from 2 feet away is only a small step away from what we've already determined to be normal behavior. And then gesturing at that player and pointing at a 16-year-old girl's face, that's just another small step. And before long, these become accepted. This is now an environment where nobody really looked differently at that coach. Nobody seemed to notice that much what was going on, except for myself and the people I was sitting with, because of our backgrounds, and thought it was totally inappropriate, and really lost a lot of respect for the coach, who to that point seemed like he was doing a pretty good job with his team. And so I think when we accept yelling as coaching, then moving to these even more negative behaviors, they start to be accepted as well. And why shouldn't a coach get in a player's face and yell and scream and point? College coaches do it on TV. Of course, you should be able to do it. But why? Why do we have to do that? Why is that our only means of communicating with a player? I saw nothing from that player that she showed disrespect to the coach, or again, that she really even did anything wrong other than, I think, run a play incorrectly. So is that really cause to be screaming and yelling and pointing and gesticulating at a player? How is that considered a normal behavior? If you were at work, in a normal office job, and you had a typo on a memo, and your coach came in and got face to face, or your boss came in and got face to face with you and started pointing at your face and screaming and yelling, I think in most situations we'd think that's a little absurd. But for some reason it's okay when adults are doing it to teenagers on a basketball court in front of a couple hundred people. So I think, again, yelling isn't coaching. There's a difference. Now, you might have to yell occasionally in coaching. You may have to raise your voice occasionally in coaching. I think that's normal and to be accepted. But when we equate one as the other, and that if you're not yelling, you're not coaching, then it's just a small steps till we get to these more negative behaviors. And these are the negative behaviors that ultimately lead to big problems, or simply, smaller problems, such as players quitting because they're sick of getting yelled at and screamed at all the time by a coach who may or may not know what he's doing. And so, again, I question all these comments that we need to yell at children and adolescents. I think a better approach would be figuring out, what's wrong with the communication as it is that's causing this yelling to occur. Why can't we communicate in another way with these players? Where's the breakdown? Is it, is it because of the players not listening? Is it the coach is not understanding or not explaining themselves well? Where's the breakdown? And then we need to address that breakdown so that the default coaching mechanism isn't just raising the volume of the voice and yelling louder and louder because the coach doesn't really know how else to get the players' attention or how else to help the players to improve whatever situation it is that they're instructing, or they're providing feedback, or they're motivating, whatever the circumstance is.